here, coming to you from my shop annex in the basement. Getting ready to do the upper cabinets to the hardware store here. So this is the bottom cabinet of the hardware store. It's got all my big bins. In this hardware store I have 3 bins up top, 1, 2, 3, that are for current project parts or upcoming project parts. This one is the parts that I'm getting ready to work on. Before I really start those cabinets, I got a couple of jigs and things that I'm going to build for around the shop. So I'm going to take my stuff from the hardware store here, head on in there and get ready. I've already done my hardware store shopping. I've got all the parts in here. Alright, both the things I'm getting ready to build were from a video I saw Izzy Swan do. One of them says large material infeed for the table saw. I bought his plans. Not that I need the plans necessarily, but I'm going to support the guy that gave me the idea. The other is for a small other infeed support. Got my box of stuff. I bought most of what's on his plan. Needed some 1x1.5 by 1.5 aluminum. And this is a Cydio crate. These are pretty nice. If you haven't heard of those, have a lot of options. They're pretty cool things. They're expensive. And you can see the parts in there. I have a bunch of toggle clamps, some bolt nuts and bolts, some rubber stoppers, and some crubber there. Took me a few to collect all this stuff. I wasn't sure whether to use the good plywood or the cheap plywood on this. I have some Baltic birch in my plywood rack, but I went ahead and grabbed a piece of the cheap stuff from the lower cabinet, a little leftover piece. Decided to make the first small jig. So I cut it up real quick and I brought it over to the router table to throw a round over on it. I don't know if you can see that little chunked out right there. I was doing my best to deal with that and make it just one little mistake, one little quick movement. It's all along here. You can see it's separating, the plies are separating right there, so it was probably separating off and it just chunked out. That is why I might use the good stuff for these jigs. Alright, that answers that question. So I start to set up the table and get out my Baltic birch plywood. This is going to sort of answer the question as to why I'm making infeed table support in the first place for my table saw. When I have this cutting table and I have the whole festool system and everything good to go there, why would I need infeed table support? Well, sometimes it's just a hassle to make one cut to set all this up. You can see here I am bringing my giant, like 9-foot rail through, and oops, no, that's not the direction I need. Let me spin this giant thing around again. Whoa, here we go. I got it. Now I'm going to go ahead and put my parallel guides on, and then I'm going to realize that oh no, I need my parallel guide extensions on there because the shorter version of it isn't good enough. I need to make a cut that's like 1 inch longer. So I go ahead and put the extensions on. Getting it done, but here we go. Now I can finally get to making the cut on the Baltic birch plywood. I only need can't remember exactly how much, 13 or 14 inches of one sheet to make all these jigs. Next up, I'm going to cross cut a piece off the bottom, and that piece I'll take off and I'll make the smallest jig out of. Here I am back at the router table, and this one turned out so much better than the cheap plywood. There's not a single gap around the edge. Really nice and about twice as heavy. One of the nice things about having Izzy Swan's plans is I know what sizes to cut and I have a cut list straight from the plans, so I would just start chopping up parts in accordance with his plans. I cut up the pieces I need for the infeed support at the table saw, and then I go over to the miter saw and I cut them all to length. I'm going to put a round over on pretty much everything that isn't connected to something else so that it's all nice and smooth. And I got to do some pretty tight layout here for the hinge area. These layouts have to be pretty accurate. They're going to be hinges, and it's going to flip this way, stop up against there, flip back. So I need to make sure that on all these, this point is exactly an inch by an inch, in an inch by an inch. There's 6 different pieces that need that exact layout. That's exactly an inch. Now I need to nail the 1 inch. That's it. This guy. Flip it around. So I need to spin this thing around. Alright, off to do that. Now that I have the layout set up at the drill press, I had to go ahead and reconfigure my stop to work on the other side. And I'm drilling the holes. Once I have all the holes drilled for the various pieces, there are 6 total pieces that need that exact layout. I go ahead and I head over to the bandsaw and cut the roundovers and then go to the sander to smooth them out. Yeah, I've been wondering why my miter saw here was making such crunchy cuts on all this stuff, such hairy cuts. Turns out I have my aluminum cutting blade in there. Apparently I was doing some aluminum before. Anyway, when I cut aluminum, I wear these. Just to keep the chunks flying off, but you can just cut it with a regular blade. I bought it basically just a cheap blade for doing this kind of stuff for this saw. And apparently I've been using it for everything for a while, so I'm going to put the festival blade back on once I get this cut. Just take it really slow, and it cuts like butter. I use no dust collection. It makes a big mess, but no problem. Perfect cuts. Now I'm going to use my disc sander as a grinder and grind some roundovers onto the aluminum. Same deal, I don't use dust collection because it can catch my dust collector on fire. I will take a little hand sandpaper and kind of go over these sharper edges right on the corners here. There's still some sharpness. Now I'm cutting the notch that will allow the leg to fully fold up. The cross piece on the leg will inset into this as it folds in. Now that the notches are cut, use a little sandpaper to get rid of the bandsaw marks, and then off to the router table, put some roundovers on them. I am a full-grown man, so I keep my table saw about 4 inches higher than most people. I have a spacer underneath. But what I noticed is when you fold these legs up and down, it's going to come down to here. I made these legs 4 inches longer than Izzy had made them. So I think I need to make them shorter, and then there's going to be a big 7-inch chunk here. This is a 3, so it'll be a 7-inch wide with the legs out there, and I think I can put the legs out further because this and this are going to be mounted in here, and the legs as they fold need to fold into there with the legs out here as opposed to folding right there. So I may just cut these back to the length that Izzy specifies in his plans so that it all folds up together. Now I'm going to do all the metal brackets that'll hold the jigs onto the table saw fence. I put rubber on them so that the fence doesn't get scratched up. The problem with cutting aluminum is it's like glitter. It gets everywhere. You clean it, you clean it, you clean it, and it just keeps falling out. I need to make 2 7.5-inch pieces like this. I've actually put the real blade back in. I was using the aluminum blade the whole time. I think the plans call for these to just be screwed in from the top into here, but I think when I run the sheets over, I really don't want to have screws there. You can feel free to call me bing, fancy, but I'm going to go ahead and domino this in there. Little did I realize that putting dominoes in this thing is going to take me an extra like hour and a half, but I went ahead and did it, and I think it's going to be really nice over time to have done it this way. Alright, I just spent a few minutes making this jig out of an old drill press table for my old drill press. I don't see any reason to test it on anything except the final piece. So I took the fence and I just put these 2 pieces here to hold the domino. The biggest one of the hassles with the domino is when you're trying to do something in the middle, you can never see the line while you're doing it. So what I figure I do is I put the line here, put these 2 pieces here so that this will slide right in there. Bang. And then you just line up the line I made there, put the line on there. Booyah, hold it down, push this sucker in. I'm being honest, I don't know if this jig withstands the test of time. I think it's a little too big and awkward to continue to have around, and it's made for a pretty specific use case, but it got the job done here. Alright, to cut the other half, I just clamp the piece that I just cut, which usually I do this first, but I wanted to play with my drill press jig, and I just line it up with the marks that are already on here. Kinda, and go to town right here. The Walt domino hammer. There we go. Nice. Just sand this down to final grit. And See, this is how the leg frames turn out. So we'll see if I can figure out how to get this bolted together. Yeah, I guess it's harder than it looked on Izzy's video. Izzy Swan made that look easy. Let's see if I can kind of smash this in a little bit. Okay, I need to put the brace on there. Let's see what I got for wood over here. So I grabbed some leftover pieces that are meant to be used for this in the plan, and I'm making a cross brace. I'm going to scribe it to the angles that I need, and then take it over to the miter saw and use my freaking laser to align it to everything on there. Okay, I'm calling that a winner. And we'll go ahead and put that sucker in. And what I want is when this thing closes, the feet are on the outside of that, sort of. That's about where they go in the Izzy plan for a normal heighted person's table saw. So I need to add about 3 inches. 3.5. So I go ahead and I cut the feet, and then I get a little bit of ADD and I move on to the other jig that's getting close to done. What you see here is the whole point of the other jig, which is to provide support beyond the edge of the table for any kind of cross-cut sled or jig that I use. I realized the groove wasn't quite smooth, so I used my router plane to get it to smooth it out. Nice groovy thing. Just needs a little cleanup with some sandpaper in there. I plan on using this jig for a while, so I'm going to go ahead and round over every little corner and every little nook and cranny and make everything smooth. There we go. Time to... I think I'm going to throw some finish on these jigs that I've been making. I kind of forgot that I needed to put together the material support for the Infeed jigs, so here we go. I'm throwing those together, I'll sand them down and get to finishing. One of my favorite parts of making these things was disassembling and reassembling this leg structure. So here I go again. I'm going to refinish it in pieces, so I'd take them back apart again, and then I'll have to put them back together again. So I'm throwing a finish on here. It's just a thin down polyurethane. Once I get some finish on these things, I decide to start assembling it. You can see I'm putting the toggle clamps on, and then I start putting the legs onto the Infeed support tables. And the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and put the feet onto the bottom of the legs. And the feet come with threaded inserts. So I go ahead and I start hammering those things in. And something's up with these threaded inserts. They're not the best. This whole thing came as a kit. It was the ones that Izzy Swan recommended. And they're fine. Those threaded inserts just don't seem to want to stay in the end grain that I have there. So I'm going to go ahead and put some glue on those things to hold them in place. After I get them installed, I realize they're just not working. So here we go. I take them down, a little bit of super glue in there, and they all hold together once I get that done. Okay, I've had 2 minor problems with this set of plans. The first one wasn't an actual problem with the plans, it was a problem with something Izzy said in the video where he said if you have a taller table saw, you just need to add length onto here, and I realized that if I did that, this would have wound up down here, which would have hit this, and my folding wouldn't happen. The second issue that I've had now is I bought the 2.5-inch hinges, and the holes are just way too far on the outside of these. Luckily, I have a problem with fender washers. I buy way too many of them. So I had a whole bunch of 3/8-inch fender washers laying around. And I think I'm going to put some fender washers in there, which will expand that out, make it a little better. So I go through the good fun of taking this whole thing back apart so that I can throw some fender washer spacers in there to make the hinges fit. Once I do that, the hinges fit pretty well, and I can go ahead and drill the holes and mount the hinges up. As I'm screwing these screws into the plywood, I don't want the plywood to split apart along the plywood seams, so I'm going ahead and using the drill sort of as a tap. I'm sort of tapping threads into the hole, and I just kind of screw it in a little bit, screw it back out a little bit, screw it in a little bit, screw it back out a little bit until I get the hole done. I've got this thing lined up. The original screws that came with these hinges are too long. I found some that'll work in my stash. There it is. Heck yeah. So here's some footage coming up from a project that's coming up. You'll see this footage again when I start building the upper cabinets for the hardware store. But this is the first time I really tried to use these things in anger, and that's a little learning curve associated with them. I bring out my full sheet of plywood, and I'm going to try to use the flip-up mechanism. And I really had to get a lot of stuff out of the way. The bench that usually sits there is usually what I sort of use as my infeed, and it really was just in the way, so I had to move it out of the way 2 or 3 times by the time all was said and done. But here I go, and I start to cut this piece of plywood. Now keep in mind, this is cheap plywood from the cheapest that I could kind of find, and you can see I'm just having trouble seeing a gap there, and I can't get it to go up against the fence for some reason. And I'm pushing in on it, trying to guide the thing up against the fence. And you can see I kind of push hard against it, and bang, it hits. This piece of plywood had a staple in the side of it from the store that I hadn't seen yet, so as soon as I pulled that staple out, it cleaned up everything and made it nice and easy to push through this time. But I'm a little traumatized, so I take it nice and slow. That pretty much wraps up this project. So what do I think of these things after 6 months or so of using them? I think they're really good. They're really useful. It's really nice to have this outfeed support when you're running big parts through the table saw. But if I'm being honest, I was looking for a holy grail of plywood management, and I just don't think there is such a thing. I really wanted this to be the super easy way to take a piece of plywood and get it cut down into the smaller pieces that I need to get started on a project. One of the problems I have with these is as I'm bringing my big piece of plywood in and I'm maneuvering it around the corner here and everything, it bashes into these legs and pushes them forward, and that moves this out of the way and makes it harder for me to get the plywood hanging onto this thing to flip it up. So I wind up having to set the plywood down, come back and kick these legs back out a couple times while I'm doing it. So that's something I could fix. I could put a pin in here or something like that, and maybe that'll happen over the years. This smaller thing here is fantastic. I use this all the time. I don't know why I didn't come up with something like that 20 years ago. It's just crazy how nice that is to just have that able to flip up. I have it hanging on the side of the table saw all the time so that I can just grab it and throw it on there. Every time I use something crosscut now, I pretty much just flip it up there real quick so that I can pull the whatever crosscut thing off, slightly off the table, get my pieces aligned and push the thing back on, and it's sort of like a cross-cut jig holder. It's really nice. Anyway, I'm really glad I built all these. I put some hooks on these to hang them on the wall. They've earned a permanent place in my shop, and they definitely make managing the plywood easier, but they're not the Holy Grail. Thanks for watching, and subscribe if you want to see these things in action on some more projects.